Dice Tower, we talk about games quite a bit, and we use a lot of gaming terminology. There's a lot of mechanisms in games that do different things. Rather than explain the mechanism in great detail, we use terms. And not everyone always understands what those terms might be, so I thought I would take a video to explain some of the more commonly used terms. Now, at the bottom of this video, I'm going to put links, times, so you can click to the thing that you want to see. For example, if you want to see area control, you look down there for the time for that. And I'm doing these in alphabetical order. Now, I'm not doing every term that exists. I'm just doing some of the more common ones. I believe I have 22 different terms that we'll go over in this video. And not every term fits everything at every exact time. In each thing, there's always going to be variations, and there's a few games that have very specific things that I've never seen in anything else. And of course, even these terms aren't going to be universally agreeing on exactly what they mean, but I'm telling you what they mean for me so that when I use them in my videos, you know what I'm talking about. All right, that's enough blather. Let's get to the first one. I use the term abstract, or sometimes in conjunction with abstract strategy, to talk about games that have no theme, essentially. Many times these games are just simple games of capturing an opponent or getting 5 in a row. And so these games are often, they're not about theme at all in any way. They're trying to do something in particular. An example, this one here, get 5 in a row. And even though these games can sometimes have terminology, like here we see Duke and Footman and Champion, essentially the theme is not there. Think chess. Chess has a king, a queen, a bishop, and a rook, but those pieces don't really mean anything other than the movement that they can do. And so players are simply trying to outmaneuver the other person, but the whole thing is kind of abstract, hence the term abstract strategy. In most games, you can do one thing on your turn. You roll the dice, or you move your pieces, etc. In a game with action points, or action point allowance, you have a certain number of actions that you can use that turn. For example, in this game, you have 4 actions usually that you can spend. In fact, this game gives you a little card that shows you the different actions that you can take on your turn. So I might spend 1 action to go here, another action to remove that virus, a 3rd action to go here, maybe another action to play a card. There are different actions that you can take, and some games have actions that might cost 2 of your actions to take. Some games have multiple things. Some things you can do the same thing twice. Sometimes you can only do each thing once. But action point allowance gives you a specific number of things that you can do, and you have to try to pick amongst those choices to make the best decisions playing that game. In an area control game, you will have usually different regions on the board that you are trying to control by having the most pieces of your color in them. Usually that will result in you getting points. Like for here, whoever has the most cubes gets 5, then 3, then 2 points. Some area control games allow you to put out the pieces by action points, which we just talked about, or by playing of cards, sometimes even war, where you're able to move pieces around. And there's many different types, but they all come down to having the most of your type of piece or color in a specific area, which will then help you win the game. Most games are symmetrical, in which both players or all the players involved have an equal chance at winning. They start the same, they have the same pieces, they have the same money. In an asymmetrical game, it's different. The players are different. Here, for example, in the popular game Netrunner, Android Netrunner, one player is going to play a corporation, and the other player is going to play a hacker who's trying to go in and basically destroy the corporation or hack into their files while the corporation is setting up traps. Each side plays very differently. Some asymmetrical games might be war games where one person controls a few very strong units and another player controls a bunch of small units that are attacking them, like the game Ogre. Or sometimes it just might be as tiny as players having different powers or special abilities. But a true asymmetrical game, the 2 sides play very differently, and yet both have an equal chance of winning. There are many different types of auctions in games. Sometimes we have what are called open-ended auctions, where people are just going to be trying to outbid one another by spending money. You go around and around until one person wins. There are auctions that are called once around, where each person only gets 1 chance to bid, and if you don't bid high enough, you're out of the auction. In other games, the amounts that you bid are set, and players will choose the amount that they're going to bid on, and if someone wants to bid higher than them, they have to pick a preset amount to bid on. There's also blind bidding auctions where players will secretly hide, then reveal how much money they're spending in a round to see who wins that one. And again, the round of auctions is really, there's auctions where everyone's shouting at the same time. There's auctions that are very calm and orderly. There are auctions that when you pay, it goes to the other players, or when you pay, even if you don't win, it goes to the bank. Different tiebreakers. There's really a huge variety of different types of auctions in games. In a card-driven game, cards drive the game. Yes, I know, self-defining terms, but what that means is your cards will determine, there's a board game behind it, but cards determine much of what goes on in the game. For example, in this game here, I can play this card either as a special ability here, which will happen, or I can play it as action points, which will give me a certain number of actions that I can take. There are games that will mix cards where they let you do different actions in a game, or they can be used in battle. Sometimes the cards can do 2, 3, 4 different things. It all depends on the game. I could use this card, for example, to try to go into outer space. I can use this card as the action here. There are different ways to use cards. Many war games and political games use this mechanism. The term CCG, or in many circles also known as TCG, or sometimes even ECG, which stands for Collectible Card Game, or Trading Card Game, or Expandable Card Game. The most popular of these is Magic the Gathering, and when we say CCG, we basically mean where you can buy a deck of cards and you can customize that deck any way you want, or within the rules of the game, and play against another player. Usually, almost always, in one of these sets of games, there's going to be cards that are easier to find, called commons, and cards, uncommons and such. Then there's rares and super rares, cards that can be very expensive. These games have many benefits and disadvantages, but they're very popular. Recently, we've seen a dice version with Dice Masters from WizKids, and WizKids also introduced collectible miniatures games, and there's even been collectible poker chip games, collectible games in general. You don't get the whole game in a box, you get part of it, enough to play with, and then you can buy usually what are called booster packs to get more. Now, a very different concept is Fantasy Flights, and other companies are following suit, called LCGs, living card games. And these, you buy the basic game. Netrunner's a good example here. We have Star Wars. You buy the basic game and you're able to play that game, but as time goes by, you'll be able to buy packs of cards. But instead of these packs being unknown what's in them, instead you know exactly what cards you're going to be getting. Everyone gets the same cards, so there's no common, uncommon, and rare cards. Other than the distribution, usually they have very similar ways that they play out, where players are building decks and going up against others. A cooperative game is a game in which all the players are working together against the game. For example, in this one here, the island is slowly sinking, and it's your job to get off the island, recover some priceless artifacts, and get together and get off. So players will be doing it in different ways. In a cooperative game, there's usually some way that everybody can lose. There's also games that are called semi-cooperative, where you have a common goal, but only one player will win. And there are other cooperative games in which one player is secretly, or multiple players are secretly, a traitor. So they are pretending as if they're working along with everybody else, but hoping that everyone will fail. But a pure cooperative game like this one here is one in which all the players together as a group are going to win or they're going to lose. A deck building game is a game in which players start with a small deck of cards, and as the game progresses, they are going to either draft or buy cards from a pool that all players can buy from. So for example here, I might spend and use some cards I have that produce money to buy a card that costs that much money. That card will be added to my deck, and when I run out of cards in my deck, I'll then shuffle those cards, and my deck will grow and change as the game goes by. Some deck building games have a certain number of cards that players can buy. Others have a changing queue of cards that come up. Deck building games can make the deck building the central aspect of the game, or it can be a very small part of the game and you use the cards to maybe move armies, or get victory points in other ways. But at the core of them, this is Dominion, which is the first deck building game. You will start with a very basic kind of dull type deck and get exciting cards and things that you can use as the game goes by. A drafting game is a game where you will get maybe a hand of cards, and you'll look over this hand of cards and you'll decide one of the cards to keep and then pass those cards to the next player, who will then pass you the 4 cards. Another player will pass you 4 cards, and you say, well, I want this one, and then pass those on. And then you'll get maybe fewer cards, and you'll draft one of those, and then fewer, and you'll draft one, and then you'll finally get 1 card left over, and that's your hand of cards. Drafting can be different ways. Some people use drafting to build decks for the collectible card games. Sometimes you're drafting tiles or units. But most of the time, drafting refers to cards, where you start with a handful of cards, but you're only going to get to keep one of them and then pass them to your neighbors. Some whole games are built around drafting. Others, it's just basically a preliminary before starting the game. A filler is a term that's basically around an entire game that is a very simple, quick, easy game to play. A filler often refers to something that fills the time between playing bigger games, but it doesn't mean that the game isn't bad on its own. Usually, like an example of this game, you can play a game of Botswana very quickly, as each turn you're going to be playing a card and then taking an animal from the middle of the table, and at the end of the game, the animals are worth the points of the card that's on top of each pile. Very simple, very easy to teach. Sometimes they're games that can be carried around in your pocket. Botswana's a little bigger than that. But fillers are games that maybe aren't the main course of when you get together and play games, but are something that can be easily done at the beginning or end. A gateway game is another term that I use for simply an introductory game. A game that if someone is new to playing games, a game that's simple to teach and to understand. I can play 2 blue cards to place 2 trains on these blue connection here. Something that's easy to play, easy to get into, maybe not as short as a filler, but it could be a main game when you get together, but something that introduces you to all the different new mechanisms. Usually a filler, a gateway game has only 1 or 2 ideas about it, or at least 1 or 2 new ideas that people haven't heard of. I often put these together in a category called family games or casual gaming. A hidden role game is a game in which players are secretly all pretending maybe to be together, but one person is not, and they're trying to figure out who that person is. The most famous game of this would be either Mafia or Werewolf. And here you can see that most of the players are werewolves, but this person's, or villagers. This person is a seer who's with the villagers, but one person here is secretly a werewolf. And players are using different types of deduction to try to figure out who the bad player is, or who people on different teams are, who a traitor might be. Or sometimes a hidden role, everyone's against each other, but you don't know what the other person is trying to accomplish. They have hidden goals. These games can be tricky because you're trying to watch what other players are doing, trying to ascertain what exactly is their goal in this game. A pick up and deliver game is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to be picking up something from one spot in the game and delivering it to another. Usually this is done in an economic type way, where when you deliver the thing, you're going to get money or some sort of reward, maybe points. It can be done. There are many train games that use this, where you're simply going to be building tracks and then using maybe actions to deliver a good from one city to another. Sometimes you have something that moves around the board, like a train or a car or a blimp or whatever it might be, to pick things up at one spot and take them to another. And there's usually a lot of geographical / logistical movement in these games, trying to figure out the most efficient ways to get items from point A to point B. A push your luck game, think of it as kind of blackjack. How far are you willing to gamble? Some push your luck games are very simple games where you roll dice and you're trying not to roll a certain thing, and if you roll too many of those, then you get nothing. Very simple games like Zombie Dice come to mind. This is an example of push your luck game in which you have a hot air balloon that's going higher and higher, and you'll be rolling dice, and players have to play cards matching the balloons on those dice, and if they can't, the balloon will crash, and you can jump out any time and get that many points. The points get higher as you go along, and you have to figure out when is the best time to jump. Push your luck style games are games for people who like to gamble without the actual necessity of losing any sort of money. People who want to see how far. Sometimes it's called press your luck, and they're games that I personally enjoy quite a bit. A roll and move game is very simple. It's a game in which you're going to roll some dice and then move a piece that far. Now, most roll and move games are very simple. They're the games that people have grown up with. Monopoly is a roll and move game. Life is a roll and move game. There's also spin and move. Like Life is basically you're spinning a spinner, but it's essentially the same thing. And many times these games have no strategy at all. But not all roll and move games have no strategy. This is a racing game called Reifenbleiten, in which players are going to roll dice and then move their bikes around, but they have multiple bikes that they can pick between when they're moving, and they also have things that they can use to mitigate their die rolls. And so roll and move games, while not as popular and common today as they used to be, still can be effective, especially in racing style games. In a set collection game, players are trying to collect sets of tiles or cards, usually to get points at the end of the game. In this game, for example, if I have a layer and then I also get another purple card, I will get 1 point for having this card in my layer. I also get points for having the jewels themselves. And different cards can increase. If I got 3 purple cards here, I'm going to get 6 points. And if I have 4 purple cards, I'll get 10 points. Many set collecting games, the more cards you get of a specific type, the more points you're going to get. Sometimes you need to set collect to win the game. A set collection game many people are familiar with is Rummy, and there's a whole style of Rummy style games where you're trying to collect cards of the same color. Sometimes you use a set of cards then to take an action over the course of the game. But a set collection is just essentially, as the game progresses, you are trying to get a whole bunch of the same or sometimes different items. The easiest form of simultaneous selection is the simple game everybody plays, rock, paper, scissors, Lizard Spock. There's just, basically each player is secretly picking something and you show it at the same time. There are games that have cards like this. For example, this one here. While an attack is stopped by a block, a throw will beat a block, but an attack will beat a throw. And so it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors, but there's more than simultaneous. Some games you will both pick a card and it says, this is the action I'm taking this turn. This is the action I'm taking this turn. You turn them over. And you'd be like, oh, wow, you and I both went to the same place on the board, or you and I both decided to bid for something. Simultaneous selection, even war, in which both players put a card down and turn it over, and the higher number wins. Although that's not as strategic as many of these games can be, where you sometimes have a limited number of cards you can play or a whole pile that you can play, and you pick which one of those you're going to do that turn, and that is the action you will take. 2 terms that I often use in games are strategy and tactics. Now they might sound like they're the same thing, but they're really not. Strategy is an overarching thing that's going to take place over the entire game. So maybe in my strategy this time, I'm going to try to move my pieces to this side of the board over the course of this game. Strategy is something that you plan at the beginning of the game. You modify it as the game progresses, but you are still planning to do that over the course of the game. Tactics is, what am I going to do right now? Some games have more of a tactical bent to them. Because, oh, something happened to me, what do I do now? Oh, something happened to me, what do I do now? And some games you really can't plan strategically because the board changes so much or the gameplay changes so much as it goes by that you're not really quite sure what your long-term plan is, but you know what you need to do right now. And in other games, they allow a deeper strategy. Think of one of the most famous games in the world, chess. Chess has a strategy. I'm moving here because I know that will affect this and this and this and this and this. But the more luck that's involved in the game, often you move towards more tactical decisions, seeing what's present right now and dealing with that. Take that games. I use this terminology usually because it involves, usually it's card games, but not always, but it's a game where I go, ha-ha, and I play a card that makes you take that. You know, that's what you say when you play it, to hurt other players or to help yourselves. Most take that games are very simple, where there are some cards, when I play those, they help me, and there are other cards I play those that hurt you. It's not always cards, sometimes it's dice, Most take-that games are very simple and involve a lot of laughing, haha, I played this on you, but there are some more strategic ones, and sometimes there are take-that games which involve teams, where there are some players against other players, and they're working together to take down the other team. A trick-taking game can often be played with a regular deck of cards, although there are many trick-taking games that have customized decks of cards. And in a trick-taking game, probably the most famous trick-taking game in the world is either hearts or spades. Usually the rules are one person will play a card of a certain suit, here they played a heart, then everyone else must also play a card of that suit unless they don't have one, in which case they can play a card of any suit. And then people will win all those cards, usually called a trick. In some games, whoever plays the highest number wins all the cards. In other games, whoever plays the highest number, that's the same as the suit that's led, wins. Other games have what is called a trump, where when you play a certain suit, like maybe in this case it would be spades, they automatically win no matter what the number might be. Other trick-taking games might have different things. For example, some trick-taking games, you must play a different suit than the player who led the first trick. Other trick-taking games, you can play any card you want, and only the numbers count. These games are all based on the same thing. They usually play with 4 players, but there are trick-taking games for 2, 3, 5, and even 6 players. In a worker placement game, players are going to place workers on different spots on the board, which will allow them to do different actions. When players place these on the board, often no one else can go there. So if I went here, for example, which in this game would give me a card that was in that spot, nobody else could go to that. Some games have workers that you have to pay to put down. Others, you can put down multiple workers in the same place. Some you can put down a bunch. And it's not always quote-unquote workers. Sometimes it's dice you're putting out. Sometimes it's spaceships. It all depends on the game. But this is a very popular thing because what it does is it makes you decide, what action do I want to do? Oh, I want to do this action. And then if I do that action, no one else can do it. But if I take that action, someone else will take this action on me. And so there's that back and forth. And that is what a worker placement game is. So there you go. That's just a few of the terms that I will use about board games, and hopefully that will help you out. There's other terms that I've used talking about gamers and things, and maybe we'll cover those in a future video. But hopefully this will give you an idea. And each of the things I talked about, there are so many different games that involve these. So if something looks interesting, you can just do a search for that term and find all sorts of games from that type. Anyhow, thanks so much for watching, guys. Go out and have fun playing games with other folks. Until next time, I'm Tom Vasel, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door!